Welcome in. Welcome to the Buddhist Wisdom Podcast and also my YouTube channel. My name is Scott Tusa. For those of you who don't know me, I am a meditation teacher and Dharma practitioner, and I like to share some of my musings and ideas and some things from my studies and some wisdom of my teachers on my podcast and on my YouTube channel. And usually it revolves around more practical Dharma, but of course I lean a little bit more towards lineage Buddhism, so that's why you're going to hear a little bit of more of that perspective here. But of course I always try to make it relatable and something you can put into practice right away in your life and meditation practice. As always, I welcome your comments, I welcome your questions, so feel free to reach out for anything. Yeah. So there's something I've been sharing on in some of my Dharma talks lately and with some of my Dharma friends and mentor and mentees. And kind of how I sum this up is through a question, which is, do I really need to calm down? Or do we really need to calm down? And to open this up a little bit, what I mean by this question is I find that a lot of us are often aiming at calmness in our meditation. And there's a spectrum there. Sometimes we're really, really clinging to that. And if we don't get that, we think we're doing something wrong in our meditation. I see that a lot with people I work with. And then sometimes it's a little bit more of a lighter experience of just sort of, when we're experiencing a lot of emotions or thoughts in our meditation practice, we might think the practice wasn't as successful or something like that. And, I'm thinking a lot about this question lately because there's not a singular answer for this. It's kind of nuanced because Buddhism is full of teachings on how to attain some kind of mental quiescence or stillness, calm abiding in our meditation. We even have teachings that, really, really emphasize that as a preliminary, meaning like if we don't have some ability to place the mind and for it to stay in the present moment, it's very difficult to make progress in more advanced meditations, insight meditation, etc. So just to get that out of the way, I'm not really challenging that idea. I think that's pretty clear. We need a mind that's pliable, that's able to rest in awareness or to abide in the present moment. We need that to some degree in order to be able to go into any other type of meditation. Because if our mind is just jumping around like a monkey all the time, or our thoughts are everywhere, it's going to be impossible to do any kind of other meditative work. So I just want to say that's kind of straightforward and clear. So I guess here what I'm really aiming at is this sort of obsession with calmness versus a practice of awareness that can allow the content of our mind, the content of our, physical sensations in the body as well as emotions to just arise and be, how to create the space for that, how to foster more of a practice that how do you say it, allows more to take place. And the reason I'm speaking on this is this perspective has really helped me, and I've seen it help quite a lot of people. So, for depending on where you're at and where your practice is at, this may or may not help you. I hope it does. So here, of course, we do need to pursue what I call a settled body. So this is really the distinction I make for people, is I recommend don't seek calmness, seek a grounded body. And a grounded body here means that the speediness, the wound up energy in the body, we do some practices to remedy that, to allow that to settle, right? So one way to talk about this, especially from the Tibetan Buddhist traditions, is having to do with something we call the wind energy or lung. So lung doesn't mean lungs. Lung is the Tibetan word for wind energy, which is a part of our subtle body that often we can't feel, but we can feel in the nervous system. So perhaps the nervous system is kind of over on top of this subtler body, which is non-physical. And the subtle body is usually described as three different components: the wind energy, the channels, and the essential drops. And what these are three components of the subtle body that work together for health and well-being, as well as sort of the mind being pliable and workable for meditation and spiritual practice, or really caught up in emotions, thoughts, and suffering. So I like this approach because it changed my perspective from sort of this cognitive idea of like, oh, now I need to settle the mind. Now I need to, which actually made it worse. It personally gave me more anxiety. I was like really forcing myself to concentrate. This was maybe 15 or 16 years ago, really forcing myself to concentrate, which was actually giving me more of a wind energy problem, pressure in my chest, more anxiety, kind of speediness. And of course, a lot of pain around like, why can't my mind settle? So there was a lot of frustration around that. And so one of my main teachers, Sodom Rinpoche, he sort of pointed out some breathing practices, which I'll share a little bit here, to help ground the energy, to help settle that wind energy that often is excessive, the upward moving wind energy that can get excessive in the chest, throat, head, and produce various kinds of emotions, etc. It's kind of like, it's like lighting rocket fuel under your emotions. Just whatever you're experiencing is going to be more intense, including anxiety. So, he taught a breath practice of simply breathing in through the nose, breathing into the lower abdomen, and breathing out. All right. So we breathe in below the navel. Just gently, slowly let the lower abdomen expand like a balloon and breathe out. Now, for a lot of people, just doing that for 10 minutes works well. But when you get good at that, on the inhalation, once you've inhaled and the belly is extended or expanded, you've inhaled below the navel, you just hold the energy there. Maybe 5 or 10 seconds, and then you breathe out. But when you hold, no tension in the chest, no tension in the shoulders if you can, just a little bit of tension in the lower abdomen. But it's still relaxed. It's sort of the hold is the belly's expanded like a balloon, and then the hold just happens on its own. So either way, you can try both of those. So as I said, just breathing in and out, doing belly breathing without holding can be really helpful in this regard. And then, of course, the hold can add some extra oomph to get the wind energy down. So that practice really helped me, as well as just becoming more aware of my felt experience when my body is speedy, right? Because, of course, we know what it's like for the mind to be speedy, right? There's a lot of thoughts, rampant thoughts, worries, fears, etc. But there's also a speediness happening in the body. So we don't even have to necessarily work with thoughts. We can if we want, but I found this particular approach a little easier and more workable for me, which is just be with the body, feel the body, and almost just like stop feeding the energy. This takes a little bit of time. That's why I taught the breathing practice first, because sometimes we need to do that, and then we can become more aware of the energy. And the analogy that always comes to mind is sort of like, have you ever seen one of those kind of plastic snow globes, right, with confetti inside, some kind of Santa Claus or something, or a house. And so if we're constantly shaking that, all the confetti is going to be all over the place, and it's constantly agitated, right? But if we just put the snow globe down, the confetti can start to come to the bottom of the globe and the water becomes still, right? So it's very similar here. If we just allow the body to be still and we don't feed the energy, we don't feed the thoughts, we just allow things to kind of play out on their own. Of course, this takes awareness, meaning we're aware and then things play out within awareness. They can just remedy and start to, resolve and ground on their own. So this often helps me quite a bit too. When I'm a little bit more agitated and the wind energy is more churned up, I might use the breath. But a lot of the times I just kind of feel the feet, feel the lower body. I'm doing it now as I'm talking to you, and just let things settle. Just let things sort of come down, right? I think for a lot of people, this is why it's so helpful to just go sit in nature, right? Because we don't have our phone, we're not, distracted, or, we may have a lot of thoughts running, but we're just sitting on the ground in nature. I think it's a wonderful way to do these kinds of things. Go in your backyard, go, sit on the grass. as they say, go touch grass, and just be there, right? Work with the breath, then just sit with the body, feel the feet, especially touching the earth. If you want some more structure and guidance around this, I have, guided meditations you can download from my website. You can go on there and sign up for my newsletter and then get some meditations, or just reach out to me. And also there's on my podcast and YouTube channel, I think if you search maybe like how to befriend anxiety or how to work with anxiety, something like that, I guide some breath practices there. So that's the groundedness piece, right? So that's kind of what I recommend. Seek groundedness as opposed to calmness. Now, I guess you could argue they're the same thing, and yes, they are. But it's just like a different way to think of it, because often what I'm seeing in myself and others, on this topic is sort of this like obsession with calmness, this obsession with groundedness, which almost takes on its own identity, and this kind of, sometimes that can turn into like a cocoon where we just want to like shut everything off. And what I've seen in Buddhist practice is actually we want to do the opposite. We want the lights on, but we actually want to turn them up, because then we can start to see the nature of suffering. We can see how our thoughts, emotions, how the way we relate to our perceptions and identities, how they're creating suffering, and then we can start to get out of that. We can start to change that relationship. That's kind of the deeper dive in Buddhism, but that is eventually where the path leads, of course, with a motivation of compassion. So we don't want to turn the lights off, because if we do, we can't see anything. We can't relate, right, to our experience. We can't actually start to see the machinations that are causing our deeper suffering, pain, stress, confusion, right, etc. So instead, I recommend doing these grounding exercises. And of course, there's way more on how to ground in the body, a lot of somatic work out there. So, find something that works for you. Now, the other side of this, right, once there's some groundedness that we can provide, then the cultivation of awareness can really take place. And as I said, pretty much most teachings say we need some groundedness before we can develop more insight through awareness. But either way, we should start practicing awareness. One teacher, Mingyur Rinpoche, he says, there's these kinds of experiences we can develop through in stillness or in meditative awareness practice. The first one is like, when the mind's like the waterfall, which is, means we're kind of overwhelmed by our thoughts. There's a lot of thoughts going. It's sort of unceasing. But as we meditate more, that waterfall becomes sort of a fast-moving stream down a mountain. As we meditate even more, it becomes a very slow-moving river or stream, right? And then eventually, as someone attains more, we could say like realization in meditation, or a more developed practice, the thinking mind or the mind itself becomes more like a placid lake, just sort of sitting. And that's an attainment one would seek in meditation. But Mingyur Rinpoche said, even with the waterfall type experience we're having, a lot of thoughts, a lot of overwhelm, we could still practice insight meditation. We could still practice deeper levels of awareness. And I found that a really helpful instruction to take to heart, because then there's two things. One is we emphasize groundedness, and then looking at the mind, looking at its nature, trying to see the nature of thoughts, etc., within awareness. So we center awareness a little bit more. But also it's sort of, for me, cut off this sort of what if kind of mind, like the endless FOMO, like what I call like endless meditation FOMO of like, oh, I need to get this particular experience or this particular thing, or, oh, wow, it'd be wonderful if I had that, or, reading biographies of great practitioners. And, it is wonderful to aspire to be like great practitioners and their levels of realization. I think we should continue to aspire towards that. But we have our own thing, we have our own experience to contend with, right? And so I kind of personally find it very practical as well to just include, whatever I'm dealing with, can I bear witness to this with an awareness? And sometimes I can't, but we try. And of course, we cultivate awareness in formal meditation, which for me is a little different than concentration. Concentration can happen while being aware. But when we cultivate awareness, it's this space that can, it's a space that's present and knowing and watchful, but anything can arise within it. So it's much more flexible, and actually it can benefit us. I don't know how to say this. Like, there's a much wider range to it. And then, of course, for those of us who want to practice insight meditation and move towards liberation and awakening in Buddhism, it offers that, because then it's the awareness that then we use within Vipassana practice to know the nature of our thoughts, emotions, perceptions, self, etc. So it's a big deal. So, when we center awareness in meditation, it becomes this space, this container where things can arise. And by things, I mean perceptions, thoughts, emotions. And we also start to see we don't have to get rid of them necessarily to find some wiggle room, to dance a little bit with them. And, in short moments in meditation, that's been incredibly liberative. And, it increases my aspiration to grow those experiences into, more reliable, sustainable ways of being. So, for me personally, that's where, like, kind of between that and bodhicitta and compassion practices, I keep it really straightforward, and mainly where my aspirations lie within my practice. And, they all become part of the same circle anyways. But this quality of awareness that can host, that can allow, it's very, very precious. So I recommend kind of seeking out some teachings on that. I've talked about that in some videos, but definitely I recommend Sonny Rinpoche, Mingyur Rinpoche. There's many, many others who teach on that incredibly well, and you can find that in their books and their courses and things like that. Just very, very helpful, this awareness as a host, right? So between the groundedness of the body and cultivating awareness as the host, we're really set up to churn the process of, the majority of Dharma teachings out there, the majority of Dharma practices, right? Because we need some kind of ability to look at the mind, to sustain a watchfulness of mind, again, awareness of mind or awareness of experience, to be able to then work with it through the Dharma, right? And once we can do that, it's sort of like, it's just a matter of process. It's just a matter of practice and putting energy into that, both formally and informally. And in my experience, it's very slow process. Sometimes it can feel kind of like a grind. That's why we need to really center a long-term wholesome intention or motivation, such as bodhicitta. Because bodhicitta doesn't have a time frame. It's not like in 1 year on May 12th at 5 p.m. I'm going to attain, it doesn't work like that for most of us. Maybe for someone who's already almost a bodhisattva, they can do that. But for most of us, it is slow. And, for me personally in that realm, I just really lean into an attitude of no matter how long this takes, this is what I'm doing. There's really nothing else more worthwhile than this, other than sort of, I guess I could say harmony in relationships and, the love and compassion and kindness we show others in the world, which is part of the path anyways. So other than that, really the energy we put into our own awakening for the benefit of others is really the highest, most important way we can use our time, in my opinion. Anyways, a little bit off topic. But all this is related in the sense that when I de-center calm, I can center all that other stuff. But when I'm centering calm, I've noticed it becomes this like ego pursuit of like, oh, I need calmness because I don't want to feel all this other garbage that I don't like, right? I don't want to think. I don't want to, be anxious anymore. So, it's sort of like, again, to me, I get this sense of like more this kind of feeling of like, just turn the light off. I don't want to exist anymore. And yeah, I totally am. I'm sympathetic and empathetic to anyone out there that you are experiencing that, and that's really what you want out of meditation. I get it. I've been there, but what I'm doing here is trying to convince you to open up a question towards that. Is that really going to help you in the end? Right? It's sort of like I don't know. Let's say we're having a problem with our spouse, and we just sort of go into the room, shut the light off, lock the door, and put the covers over our head. Does that really solve it? Maybe sometimes, just sort of like, maybe sometimes, but not all the time. And ultimately, it doesn't change the dynamics of the communication or relationship, right? So anyways, just some food for thought and something I'm really passionate about because I've seen just, how much it's helped me so far. Of course, I'm a beginner in that process, but it's helped me a lot. And the mentees I work with, I really, really do see when it clicks, it changes their practice. So yeah, just some things I wanted to share on today. As always, I'm open to your feedback and input. Happy to do more stuff on this kind of topic. Just let me know. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.